So this week marks 70 years since the Supreme Court's decision in Brown versus the Board of Education. That ruling made it illegal to segregate schools in the U.S. based on race. To mark the occasion, President Biden is set to meet with the plaintiffs involved in that case and their family members today, according to a White House official. Now, the meeting kicks off several days of events planned for the president and the vice president commemorating the Supreme Court decision. But we want to talk a little bit more about the decision and where things are at today. We want to bring in Rashad Robinson. He's the president of Color of Change, a nonprofit civil rights advocacy organization. Thank you so much for joining us. So, yes, 70 years ago, Brown versus the Board of Education makes it illegal to segregate. And then it takes this kind of almost Herculean effort, though, to implement that.
Years
right?
long.
The school boards are resistant across the country, but eventually we get there. Just dropped my earpiece. But I want to talk about where we are today. If you Google the words resegregation, if you Google the words achievement gap, you're going to find a lot of articles on that. When you look at the school systems across the country, how are we doing in terms of, in terms of maintaining non-integrated schools, but also in terms of educating children equally?
I think we're doing pretty poorly. I think we're getting a D or an F. And in so many places, we see communities and leaders not even trying. And I think this is part of the important story, even while we see attempts to ban Black history and ban sort of the teaching of our true story, we actually have to truly understand the story. And you talked about it a little bit. It wasn't just that the Supreme Court ruled that segregation was illegal. It took, military officials and government officials and police and so much marching and protesting and people being killed in some instances just to be able to move to actually implement that law. And in so many places, we never actually saw Brown versus the Board of Education having the sort of full chance of full integration. Just as schools were starting to be integrated in many places, we watched as they were then being underfunded or defunded. We watched as all sorts of attempts to undermine public education in this country. And so the sort of pathway to making sure that all of our children have an opportunity for an education and that our society sort of values that is a fight that we have to continue and recognize that there are written rules and there are unwritten rules, and we have to deal with both of those things.
We obviously want to talk about what needs to be done, but how essentially are those effects continuing to be felt today?
I think those effects are being continued to be felt by, just looking at the sort of ways in which schools are funded based off of tax property in so many places. And then as a result, we see such a deep disparity in terms of the type of education people are getting, young people are getting based off of the zip code, based off of where they are born, based off of the access to opportunity, and of course, based off of their race. We see, all sorts of ways in which opportunities for sort of advanced classes like AP and other things are limited to certain students, and that then impacts whether or not young people have an opportunity to go to college and have an opportunity for sort of further educational opportunities. We see all of the ways in which decisions that are made and inequality that is deeply manufactured, not sort of an unfortunate thing that happens, but really a design system in how we sort of build and create these systems, playing themselves out in the results that we get. And the results that we get are things that, we can't accept if we actually want to think about being a competitive society on the world stage. We do have to educate all of our young people and give them an opportunity. But these are choices that are being made, and these choices that are being made are having deep impacts.
I think throughout the years, there have been attempts to sort of equalize things, whether it's No Child Left Behind or maybe charter schools or vouchers, different attempts to ensure that that the achievement gap was closed. But it just doesn't seem to be working. What do you think is the problem here? What's the hump that we have to get over?
It's really interesting because we sometimes talk about it as an achievement gap, which we then focus on what the young people are and aren't doing, instead of perhaps focusing on the adults and focusing on their delivery gap, focusing on the schools and our government and their sort of inability to provide and meet the standards, right? We are sort of focusing on what the kids are and aren't doing instead of actually focusing on the results of the adults who have the responsibility to deliver on the system. And I think if we did focus more on what the adults weren't doing, perhaps we would have the type of accountability on those in power to actually fix the problems. The incentive structures would have perhaps changed some. You know, the kind of active and passive voices that we oftentimes use when we talk about inequality in general, whether we say people are less likely to get a loan from the bank instead of banks are less likely to give loans to Black people. You know, we say it and then we put the onus on Black people to do better with banks that have excluded them rather than the banks that have, and then focusing on the banks who have caused the problems. And we do the same thing with the schools. We say Black young kids are not graduating at the same rates as white kids instead of talking about what the schools are not actually doing to graduate and provide and produce for young people. And I think part of the sort of challenge that we face coming 70 years outside of Brown is how do we recognize that the role of those in power, those who are responsible, those who deliver resources to schools has to be part of the conversation in a deep way. Until we have true accountability, we're not going to have true change.
Rashad Robinson,
Yeah.
fascinating conversation. Thank you.
Thanks for being here.